Hello and welcome to the FatBoss Guide to Brackenspore on Mythic difficulty in Highmaul.
Yes, and this fight has become pretty clusterfucky, really. It's actually really awesome. You got exploding mushrooms everywhere and huge tidal waves coming in, loads more spore shooters, the creeping moss is going crazy. It's awesome, a really good fight. The DPS requirement and HPS requirement isn't huge in comparison to the other bosses, so you probably want to be doing this boss around the third. You'll probably be progressing on this after Twin Orgon. But yeah, it's a very good boss, a very enjoyable one at that.
Now, before we go into the mechanics of the fight, please do click up on the annotation you see on your screen now if you haven't done the encounter on normal heroic difficulty. That video will explain all the mechanics of the fight and how it works and everything like that, because in this video, of course, we're only focusing on the changes in Mythic. Now, for this encounter, you do want to bring 2 tanks, you want to bring 4 healers, and bring an even mixture of ranged and melee DPS. And in these sort of videos, we don't usually go over healing compositions, but for this fight, it is actually pretty important, because the tanks get absolutely trashed. The amount of damage you take in this fight as a tank is far higher than it was on heroic. This kind of forces you to bring really strong tank healers, such as your discs and your paladins, and really disc is quite an important one, because the breath mechanic on Mythic deals far more damage than it does on normal or heroic, and it forces you to use tank cooldowns or external cooldowns from other players. However, if you bring a disc, the 99% healing reduction doesn't actually apply to absorbs, so the priest can just spam shields on the tank while that breath is going on, and it pretty much trivializes it. So if you can bring a disc priest and a holy paladin, it will make this fight a lot easier for yourselves. It is, however, quite important that you do bring 2 other healers that have large AoE healing cooldowns, such as druids with a tranquility, shaman with healing tide totem and spirit link and ascendance, and of course monks with their revivals. Having 2 of any of these classes or a mixture of them for the rest of your healers is really great, because the infesting spores in Mythic deals far more damage than it did on heroic. If no one uses any healing cooldowns on the infesting spores and you are stood underneath a green shroom, you'll pretty much be on around 20 to 30% health when the last stack expires on you, which can be really dangerous if there's other things going on from the fight, and really you just want everyone to be topped up. So even though you are on top of the green shroom, you do want to use set cooldowns just so everyone is topped off. So in our composition you see on the screen now, we do actually have 2 druids. So on the first infesting spores we use a trank, on the second one we use a trank, and on the third one we use a barrier and an aura mastery from the disc and the holy paladin. And that's pretty much enough just so everyone is very safe within these infesting spores. So apart from the druids obviously bringing the trank, it is their job to actually heal the shrooms themselves. The paladin and the disc pretty much don't touch the shrooms at all. All they do is focus on the tanks. Now in Mythic, it's incredibly important that the shrooms are topped up as late as possible without it being too sketchy, because the amount the shrooms decay in Mythic is far quicker than it was in normal or heroic. So if you top the shroom instantly, with the infesting spores coming in like 20 seconds time or something like that, the druids are going to have to go completely mental, or whatever characters you've got assigned to heal that shroom are going to have to go absolutely apeshit to keep it alive. So heal it late, and then just spam heal it while the infesting spores is going on, or until you need to use your trank or your cooldowns or whatever. As for the blue shrooms in this encounter, you pretty much don't have time to heal them. If your healers are extremely well geared, and all the healers are confident swapping to them just for a small period of time, it's a great idea just to instantly top them, stack underneath it, and then go back to your normal jobs. And if the blue one dies and just decays and ends, that's fine. If you can do that for every single blue shroom, that's great, but note, we only did it for round 2 of them, and we'd only ever do it when we had something really strong up. So the druids have Heart of the Wild up, you can do like double rejuve Genesis and then a Nature Swiftness healing touch, and that would pretty much instantly top it. Or we could use a Lay on Hands just to instantly top it. But ultimately the blue shrooms aren't really important for DPS, it's only for healer mana. But they're the fundamentals of healing for this fight. You need to get those done. Basically, top green shrooms late, keep the tanks up, discs do your shit while the tanks are getting breathed on, and only ever top the blue shrooms if it's completely safe to do so, and you could use that extra mana. So moving away from all the healing shit, let's actually talk about the new mechanics in the fight.
Yes, and the first of which is a fucking amazing mechanic called Exploding Fungus. This will fill the whole room up with these little mushrooms that kind of spawn over a period of time, and then they all explode at the exact same point, dealing huge amounts of damage to anyone stood near them. Like, a ridiculous amount of damage. It will pretty much one-shot anyone unless you use a cooldown, so just don't stand in the mushrooms. Like melee, it can be sometimes a little bit difficult to see where the mushrooms are. Stop doing damage and run away and just don't die. Very important. So it's very simple. Move away from the mushroom. Now this cannot happen during an infesting spores, however it can happen just before or just afterwards. So you should be pretty safe stacking inside a green shroom during the infesting spores. Just be ready to move out very quickly afterwards if the whole room does suddenly fill up with shrooms.
And the other mechanic that's been added to the fight on Mythic is Call of the Tides. Now when the boss casts this, it will send a huge wave across the entire room. If you get hit by this wave, it will one-hit you unless you use, again, a massive damage reduction. However, it's very easy to avoid. The wave does have gaps in it. As long as you spot the wave early, and the boss does cast it, there's an actual cast bar for it, so when it does come up, you know when it's coming in. Just move from the waves, go in the gaps, and you'll be absolutely fine.
However, the boss can cast this just before an infesting spores come in, and then he'll go straight into infesting spores, as there's a giant fucking tsunami coming towards you, and you're trying to stack up. And if you're unlucky, and the gaps don't happen to match up with where your shroom is, well, you have to move during an infesting spores, which is doing a shit ton of damage to you. This happens rarely, but it can happen. Saving like an aspect for the Fox at this point is so good, because your healers might need to use their healing cooldowns a little bit earlier. You probably need to use your own personal damage reductions as well. It is manageable, but it's a right pain in the ass, so just be aware that that can happen. Now, talking briefly about the ads that were on normal mode, spore shooters, instead of 2 of them spawning, 4 of them spawn now. #1 priority on DPS once again. Everyone switch to them, completely annihilate these spore shooters. I'm talking to melee as well. Get off the boss, go deal with the spore shooters, because they need to die as soon as possible, because you don't want any more damage going out, because your healers are just going to fall behind. Now, with the big ad that always spawns in, he can spawn at horrible times, such as when like a tidal wave is coming in or anything. You might need to assign a ranged DPS just to have a backup interrupt, but it's still the same thing. He's the #2 priority for DPS. You need to assign like 3 people to do interrupts one after another. You might want to assign backups at each one of those just in case something goes wrong as well, but just keep him interrupted and just kill him as soon as you can.
And it's also a good idea to have a ranged DPS set to interrupt him if your tank needs to move violently because of a wave. So if the tank literally needs to strafe and just move like 30 yards, it could be difficult for the melee to keep up and avoid the wave and interrupt the guy at the exact same time.
Yeah.
So call for a ranged interrupt if that situation does ever occur.
Now, the last thing in the encounter that you need to worry about is, of course, the creeping moss. And you may notice there's 3 flamethrowers. And this is really necessary because of the amount of creeping moss there is. Not only is there more of it, but it spreads quicker.
Now, because there is so much more creeping moss and it does spread so much quicker, you really need to have very good communication between the 3 people that you decide to actually deal with it using the flamethrowers. As you may have noticed, we have world markers all around the room, so they can quickly use them for reference and say which player goes where.
Now, in terms of assigning which flamethrower person does what, we generally had 1 person at the entrance of the room and 1 person at the opposite end of the room, because that was where most of the moss was spawning. Now, 1 person generally cleared the shoreline because there wasn't too much moss there, and was the backup person. So if the green shroom spawned in a really horrible place, or one of the sides just got completely overwhelmed and someone overheated by accident, he'd be the fella that runs in and saves the day, and it's very nice to have that. Now, good classes for the flamethrowers on Mythic generally are Hunters and Boomkins, because Hunters are very good because they're very mobile. They've got a high amount of survivability if shit goes wrong, because you'll probably get caught out by a wave once or twice. It's not very nice. And Boomkins, strangely enough, do a hell of a lot of damage from the buff that you get from the flamethrowers with their starfall and everything like that. They can do completely ridiculous damage. So if you do want to whore on DPS, Boomkins, get the flamethrower. It really does help out.
And they're just amazing at killing the spore shooters as well.
Yeah, they can pretty much one-shot a spore shooter if they've got high enough stacks. Now, also for the backup guy, it's really nice to have him as a rogue. The reason this is generally he'll get the most horrible jobs, so it's nice because he has Cloak of Shadows, as well as he has incredibly high movement speed with either sprint or burst of speed or anything that you're using, so he can clear whenever you need him to clear, and it's just much nicer. And of course, he's always going to be roughly near the shoreline because that's where the boss generally is.
But regarding the flamethrower people in general, it's exactly the same as Heroic.
Oh yeah.
You just need to make sure that you just clear it a lot better than what you did before, because it's actually very important. But to wrap up the fight, if you know this fight well on Heroic, you'll be able to execute it very well on Mythic. You just need to make sure that, of course, you avoid the wave and you avoid these new exploding mushrooms that spawn every 60 seconds or so. It's really simple. There's not a lot to it. It's just the fight is quite long. I mean, of course, it depends on your DPS. The enrage timer on this boss is not tight at all.
No.
You have loads of time to kill it. But yeah, it's just very repetitive, very long fight. But if you grasp it by the balls, you'll be absolutely fine. And yeah, it's just about progressing it slowly.
So thank you very much for watching, guys. If this guide did help you out, then make sure you leave us a like. It helps us out a lot. And if you'd like to see any of our other Mythic Highmaul guides, then make sure you click up on the annotations you see on your screen now, and that'll take you straight to those videos.
Thanks for watching.
Thank you.